The crack of dawn, or rather the moment you truly wake up, changes everything. 1 second you're navigating the world the way others do, comfortable routines, easy beliefs, familiar comforts, and then the next you awaken. And when you awaken, something inside you transforms, and you begin to lose things. Some losses are small, almost imperceptible. Others cut deep, and they cannot be recovered. The person you once were still flickers in memory, but you cannot return to that version of yourself. And that is exactly the paradox of awakening. You gain clarity, you gain perspective, but you also lose things that matter. The philosopher, political scientist Machiavelli, though mostly remembered for power tactics and statecraft, gives us a lens to see what those awakening people irrevocably lose. Imagine a person who has slept for years in the slumber of the conditioned life, doing what's expected, seeking approval, following the map made by others. Then one morning they realize this was not their map. Something inside them stirs. The awakening begins. With that awakening comes a price. What awakens people lose is not physical, not material, at least not at first, but the innocence of ignorance. They lose the sweet comfort of not knowing, the bliss of illusion, the comfortable belief in this is just the way things are. And once it's gone, it cannot be put back. Machiavelli reminds us that men are created in such a way that they can desire everything, but cannot satisfy everything. That truth, once seen from the inside, once lived, means you cannot pretend any longer that you don't know. When you awaken, you lose the belief that you are safe simply because you are good, or because you deserve it. You lose the illusion that others will always honor what they say. You begin to see allegiance, loyalty, friendship not as simple, eternal bonds, but as contracts, sometimes hidden ones. Machiavelli taught, in the world of power and politics, that appearances matter far more than truth, that emotions belie calculation, that the fear of losing drives the same motion as the desire to gain. So when you awaken, you lose the naivete of human interactions. You lose the faith in the automatic, we're all in this together, a story, and that loss is painful, but it is necessary. Without losing the past illusions, you cannot root yourself in the renewed reality. Think of the person who wakes up to find that the allies they trusted were never truly behind them. The betrayals were always waiting in the wings, the smiles always masks. Machiavelli insists that in human affairs, results matter more than intentions. Too, when somebody awakens sees this, they cannot go back and pretend it wasn't so. They lose the comfortable buffers of ignorance. They lose the luxury of being deceived. Consider the inner world of the awakened. There is no longer the comfort of denial. You now recognize you are a player in a game you didn't ask to be in, not because someone else invited you, but because you opened your eyes. And with that recognition comes responsibility, comes vigilance, comes a kind of solitude. You lose the crowd's companionship in its unquestioning state. Others continue in the slumber of assumption, but you cannot. The awakened person loses the ability to just go along. They lose the innocence of being unbothered. The absence of that innocence is something they can never get back. Machiavelli observed that the powerful are never satisfied with their power. They are always haunted by what they might lose. Christor Org 1. This insight holds for one who awakens. Once you have seen your illusions, you become vulnerable in a new way. Your innocence is gone, and you must now live with a continual sense of potential loss, the loss of illusions, the loss of safety, the loss of ignorance. This becomes your new condition. What you have lost is something intangible but essential, the comfort of blindness. When someone awakens, they lose their former identity, not necessarily externally, but internally. The self that believed, that trusted, that held on to what was known, begins to fragment. You find pieces of yourself that are old and familiar, and you find new parts you didn't know existed. The old self cannot quite hold the new one, and you don't want it to. The awakened person must shed the old garment, but once venturing into this new self, there is no returning to the old. This is loss number 3, the loss of the past self. And Machiavelli would say that in this field of transformation, a man must adapt. He must change the costume of his soul like a prince changes his armor when war becomes imminent. Another loss is the belief that things will remain the same. The awakened person cannot trust in permanence. Machiavelli insisted that fortune controls half of human actions, the other half is controlled by us. Wikipedia 3 for the awakened, the illusion of permanence dissolves. You accept unpredictability. You accept that the next moment may append everything you believe. So you lose faith in stability as you once knew it. That is the cost of waking. Once you realize the rules have shifted, you cannot pretend the rules will remain unchanged. You can't assume tomorrow is safe. You lose your habitual anchor. In that moment of awakening, there is a fierce liberation. You see the matrix of your world. You see the hidden stored assumptions. You see the forces beneath. But that very liberation brings loss. The awakened person loses the audience's applause. Because once you no longer play the role the crowd expects, you become invisible or you become an outlier. You lose the easy comfort of being liked for who you were, for the known version of you. Machiavelli notes that those who innovate, who bring new ideas, must be backed by power or they will be destroyed. Ian Chadwick. Calm 4. Similarly, the awakened person, who now carries new truths, may find themselves isolated. The world they fit into before no longer fits them. They have lost the belonging of the past. And this is perhaps the greatest irreversible loss, the freedom to return to the old narrative of life. The awakened cannot imitate the unawakened. They cannot pretend they don't know what they know. They cannot swallow the pill of ignorance again. They cannot unsee what they have seen. They cannot choose the path they awakened into. The only path forward is the one they must build themselves. They lose the right to rely solely on others to lead. They lose the role of being victim of circumstance. They lose the sweet sleep of resignation. And Machiavelli's wisdom helps them hold steady in that loss. He shows that knowledge is power, but power demands vigilance. To wake up is to lose innocence. It is to lose ignorance. It is to lose your former self. It is to lose your audience. It is to lose the complacency of belonging. The awakened person has lost much, yet what they gain is far greater: clarity, self-ownership, autonomy, authenticity. But even those gains don't erase the losses, because those losses are the foundation of the new state. To stand in the new reality, you must stand on the ruins of what you once were. In Machiavelli's world, power is never static. It flows, it recedes, it is seized and held only by those who understand the underlying game. For the awakened, life becomes both more real and more precarious. You've taken off the cloak of ignorance, but now you must choose. Will you stand or will you run back to comfort? If you choose to stand, you inherit the cost of your awakening. You live with the loss. You live with the tension of knowing and not knowing, of seeing and being seen, of power and vulnerability. There is a profound moment when you recognize that the world does not owe you coherence. The awakened person sees the jagged edges. They see the mismatch between promise and outcome. Machiavelli taught that a ruler's missteps come not from lack of goodness, but from mismanaging desire, from forgetting the laws of nature and of state. Christorol. Org. 1. Similarly, when someone awakens, they lose the naive faith that good intention ensures good outcome. They lose the story that life will reward them because they played nice. They now understand intention is no shield. Once you know this, you cannot unknow it. This loss is humbling. It forces the awakened to become architects of their world, not passengers. The awakened lose the right to remain passive. They have seen enough to know that passivity is no longer safe. They must act, adapt, decide. Machiavelli wrote that the nature of people is variable, and though easy to persuade, difficult to keep persuaded. Ian Chadwick? Calm, for once you awake, you lose the misbelief that you can just go with the flow, rely on goodwill, and trust that everything will sort itself out. You discover you are the captain of your own helm, or you may drift into ruin. And let's not ignore the most visceral of losses, the loss of comfort. When you awaken, you lose comfort. You lose the detachment of "this doesn't affect me." You now feel more deeply, more clearly, more acutely. The world's dualities and contradictions become your burden. Machiavelli insisted ambition never ceases, desire never fully satisfies, fear of loss drives as much as desire for gain. Once you awaken, you cannot sleep through life anymore. You cannot pretend. That restlessness becomes your new companion. That loss of comfort may cost you relationships, it may cost you stability, it may cost you reputation, but it is part of the price. Often people mistakenly believe awakening means gaining something new and wonderful and leaving the past behind in neat piles. But real awakening doesn't just add, it subtracts. It demands you leave behind what you once leaned on. And once you leave it behind, you can't go back. You've crossed a threshold. Machiavelli's insight about power, impermanence, self-interest, and vigilance shows us why. The awakened person cannot return to ignorance, because ignorance is just a different kind of submission. The world will no longer let them pretend. They've acquired the knowledge that cannot be unseen, and that means they live differently, more alert, more self-responsible, more alone. In that quiet, sometimes painful space of loss, the awakened person finds their integrity. They may find meaning, they may find purpose, but the price has been paid. And for those who still sleep, the awakened appear strange, unsettling, distant. The awakened have lost what others hold dear: ease, belonging, unquestioned trust, endless hope in others. And these losses create a kind of freedom, strange but real. Machiavelli believed that a prince must sometimes do what is necessary, not what is just. Must know the human heart, its dark currents, not just its ideal. Must expect instability and design for it. The awakened person, just like the wise prince, must recognize the world is not fair and still proceed. They must know those losses they endure are part of the terrain. They must maneuver, adapt, persist. And ironically, through loss they gain vantage. Through the shedding of illusions they stand sharper. They see clearer. They move with more authenticity. The losses are irreversible. The person you were cannot be resumed, like a book you close and reopen. The ignorance you had cannot be refilled like a cup. The trust you had cannot be recast in the same form because you now know what lies beneath. The peace you took for granted cannot be reclaimed in the same manner because you now know what could break it. Yet within that loss lies possibility. Because when you lose what you once were, you are free to become what you might be. When you lose your former self, you are open to constructing a new self. When you lose your comfort, you are ready to wrestle with the world as it is, not as you wished it to be. Machiavelli doesn't promise you safety, he promises you clarity, and clarity is a fierce companion. If you've awakened, you now live with a new contract. You have lost so much, but you also hold a new kind of power, the power of seeing, the power of taking responsibility, the power of choosing your path. The losses are the foundations for the new architecture of your life. You may never get them back, and you don't want to, because if you did, you would forsake what you have become. You would trade your authenticity for comfort. You would abandon your awakening for the illusion of sleep. There is a final truth. The awakened person loses the right to rest in complacency. They must stay alert. They must stay honest. They must stay adaptive. When Machiavelli warned that a prince who relies only on past glories will lose his state, he was speaking to the awakened soul. For the awakened, the past glories of ignorance are no shield. The comfort of sleep is no ally. You must keep moving, you must keep renewing, you must keep building with what remains, you must keep leading yourself into your next territory. So yes, what awakened people lose that they can never get back is many things. Ignorance, innocence, the past self, unthinking trust, comfort, belonging, illusions of permanence, illusions of ease. These losses are real, profound, irreversible. But they are not the end of the story. They are the necessary shedding. The new person emerges in the space created by those losses. And as Machiavelli teaches, to hold power over one's life, to live with integrity and insight, one must accept the game, the loss, the risk, the clarity. The awakened soul chooses this. They lose what cannot be regained so they can find what must be gained. The journey continues from there. Thank you for listening, for witnessing the awakening and the cost for stepping into the arena. Let us walk on with eyes open, with the clarity gained and the losses honored, and may we build with courage the self that remains.